All right, welcome to week 5 of 6 in our Good to Better series. It's often helpful to give a bit of a recap at the beginning of these things, and so let's kind of step back and think, all right, what have we accomplished here so far? What have we accomplished in the first 4 weeks? Talked about what Philistines were. Philistines are their knowledge. They're a representation of knowledge, not just earthly knowledge, but spiritual knowledge. They know correspondences and things like that. So they have some things right. They confirm some wrong things to be true, though, right? Philistines are a problem for the children of Israel. And what we pick up our story, David, who's anointed king, but not actually serving as king, is on the run from Saul. He's living among the Philistines. And we see that this was all a master plan, if you will, to get David in a position where he can deal with the Amalekites. David's working in Philistine land, and he's using that opportunity to go get Amalekites. The Amalekites are symbols of the doubt that we have. Often the doubt that when we're already feeling down, we're a little beaten up, the Amalekites come in and hit us down a little bit farther. David needs to deal with this doubt in these Amalekites for the very simple reason that we can't defeat the Philistines if we haven't gotten rid of the doubt. Why did the Philistines cause the Israelites so much trouble? Because they doubted their ability to beat them. So David takes care of that. He's in the whole thing of getting rid of Amalekites, and we have that whole Amalekites take over Ziklag thing and burn the city down, and David comes back and wipes them out. And then we switched over to Saul and his life, or the end of his life, where Saul is freaking out. He's consulting a witch tells him, you're going to die soon. He does. And the Philistines kill Saul. But a young Amalekite, well, he's there at the end. He brings David some remnants of Saul, like his I forget what it was, like a bracelet and something else. And says, look, your enemy's dead. And David's like, what? How dare you put your hand on the Lord's anointed? You've testified to your own misdoings here. And so David orders him to be executed because, well, he was a bad person, and he was an Amalekite. So Amalekites are dealt with, and we don't see them anymore. Doubt is erased. The Philistines are still out there, and at this point, with Saul dead, today's story is about this ascendancy to the throne. And what you're going to see here in this first reading, I hope you catch it. It's at the end, but catch it that this takes time. You know, it's not like Saul dies and all of a sudden, whoop, David's in charge. Everybody's thrown out of the parade. This is going to take time. There is a cleanup, a reorganization, a restructuring. You know, it's not a peaceful transfer of power. You know, here we have an election on a Saturday and the new prime minister is up and running on Monday kind of thing. That is not how this goes. So with that in mind, let's take a look at 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. And let's see how this goes. So it happened just after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? Right? Saul's dead. What do I do? Lord said to him, go up. David said, where shall I go up? He said, to Hebron. Pause. What is it that makes David such a great king? He asks. He checks in. Okay, Saul said, what should I do? Right? Many people, they would just take it on their own desires and ambitions and take it on themselves. Okay, boom. This is what I'm going to go do. David doesn't just rush into things. He doesn't just run ahead and charge and, all right, I'm in charge. Here we go. This is what I've been waiting for. I've been waiting 13 years for this day. All right, now it's my turn. Oh, he pauses. Okay, Lord, what should I do? The answer seems to be obvious, right? You should go be king. He says, what should I do? Where shall I go? Go to Hebron. So David went up there, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And David brought up the men who were with him, every man with his own household, and so they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. Now, I don't expect you to remember this, but Hebron's a significant city. This is where the Nephilim, like the giants of old, were. All right, this is where like the baddest of the bad were when Joshua came in to take over the land. These were the guys they were scared of and didn't come into the land to be. So that David's starting there, it's telling us, okay, the spiritual has power over this darkest part of our life. Okay? Then the men of Judah came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. Dun, 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 dun. David is king. All right? Note that in your minds. And they told David, saying, the men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who buried Saul. So David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, you are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your Lord, to Saul, and have buried him. And now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you. I also will repay you this kindness, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strengthened, and be valiant, for your master Saul is dead. And also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. But Abner, son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, okay? Burn that in your minds for the morning. Abner is the commander of Saul's army. He took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned for 2 years. All right? 2 years. All right? Saul is dead. Ishbosheth reigns for 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And at the time David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. 7 years, right? This is not a short-term proposition, this transition. I mean, what is this speaking to you? I mean, it says to me, we got to be patient with ourselves, right? You decide one day you're going to wake up and be a better person. Guess what? It's going to take time. There is a process. You've got to judge it by progress and process, not by instant results. But what happens following this, and I'm just going to paraphrase the story because it's going to take too long to read it all, but what happens next is war. War. And the first one that happens is, oh yes, I have a picture to show this. The two sides, you have Abner, Saul's commander, and you have Joab, David's commander. They each get 20 young men, and they say, hey, we're going to have a fight, and we're going to decide, the kingship this way. And what ends up happening is they say, okay, fight! And everybody dies. They all stab each other at the same time, and they all fall down, and all 40 of these kids die. And this is basically a rather odd picture that the writings give us of how the spiritual side has its arguments as to why being good is the highest priority. The natural side has this argument as to why truth, why being right is the priority. Sounds familiar to our Kindred Love story, right? So they both have their arguments as to why, and they clash, and neither side wins. Neither side goes home feeling like they won. It's the first encounter. But then these encounters keep happening. And instead of just being this kind of gladiatorial, philosophical argument, it just becomes kind of an all-out, free-for-all war. And David's men and Saul's sons, commanders, men, they all fight. And David's men keep winning. They keep winning. And eventually, it gets to the point where David's men have such a big advantage that Saul's men, they keep pulling away. They keep pulling back. What we end up seeing is that victory is common to both sides. But throughout the process, As David's winning, it's this picture of the spiritual side ascending. The spiritual desire to be good is making its self in power, right? The desire for us to say, this is the most important thing, is winning. It doesn't happen in the first battle, but it does slowly happen. In every regenerate mind, there is this conflict to determine whether truth is going to be first or being good is going to be first. The question at this point of who is going to be king is actually still undecided. But eventually, the wars stop happening. What we also get then is another little story where Ishbosheth falsely accuses Abner, so he's the commander of his army, he makes a false accusation about him. Abner blows his top, saying, "What? How dare you accuse me of that? I have done no such thing. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going over to David's side, and I'm taking the kingdom with me." Once we get your next reading, 2 Samuel chapter 3. Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David, saying, "Whose is the land?" Saying also, "Make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you." David said, "Good, I will make a covenant with you. But one thing I require of you, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face." So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. Kind of a weird scenario, right? Ishbosheth doesn't seem like he's terribly bright giving her over, but what you may recall is when David was in the good graces of Saul, Saul gave him this daughter to be his wife. When Saul goes insane, wants to kill David, David pretends to be sick one day, hides in the apartment or the house, whatever, and it's Michal, I don't know how you pronounce the name, but Michal, who drops a line out the window for David to escape. She lies to the soldier, buys him time to run, and he escapes. Saul's no dummy. He figures out what his daughter's done. She says, "Oh, but he threatened to kill me, blah, blah, blah." And so then Saul just takes this woman and gives her to somebody else to be his wife instead of David's. But David's like, if we're going to do this, I want my wife back. I want my wife back. And what the writings give us is that she's the medium by which these two kingdoms, by which our external self and our internal self are united. And that's kind of what the whole process becomes, right? Making sure that what's in our insides is reflected through on our outsides. She's the medium that is. And as a woman, she's an affection, she's a love. So she is this love for which the internal and the external are brought together. So David says, I can't have a kingdom unless my inside and my outside are in alignment, in integrity. They got to become one. And it's interesting to note that it says in the scriptures that she loved David. So there's love and affection in that. There has to be some gratification, I would say, in the unifying of these two, this conjunction of the two. But in the meantime, we also have another problem that happens, and it's Abner and Joab. Let's see. So what ends up happening, okay, I didn't put this in the order of service. So in one of the battles earlier on, Joab and his brothers are fighting against Abner and his team. Well, Abner kills one of Joab's brothers. Joab's not happy about this. So when Abner comes to make this truce, Joab hears about it and is like, hey, how can we let this guy walk away free? He's the enemy. Joab convinces Abner to come off and have a separate meeting with him, and Joab uses this moment to kill Abner. Alright, so Saul's commander is now dead. Joab has done something that he was not supposed to do. Joab was totally out of line, and David is livid. He's like, I did not say to do this. He wants to make it very well known throughout the kingdom. This was not my idea. Abner and I, we were on good terms. We were making a peace agreement. This was not what I wanted to do. So your last reading, it's 2 Samuel, it's supposed to say chapter 3, not chapter 2, but it's 2 Samuel chapter 3, verses 31 and 38. Then David said to Joab and all the other people who were with him, tear your clothes, gird yourselves with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner. Then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? So what is this? What is this? What is this in your life? What is this craziness? How do we see this in your life? Well, you've got to remember that this is a story where we are changing up how we see the world. All right? This is a big deal. This is a changing up of how we see the world. A lot of people go through life and we're a little bit nuts. We all have our things that make us who we are, and sometimes that manifests itself in us having some strange behaviors and strange thoughts that we go, wow, why do I do this? Well, I had a friend who was a psychiatrist, and we talked about this kind of stuff, and he says, look, often the things that people do that to you may seem nuts are the things that help keep them together mentally. Right? They see the world in the way that they do, and they hold it in this strange way because, well, that's how they cope. That's how they manage to get through things. We all have our things, right? You know, sometimes you feel, I see this in younger people more than older people, but, you know, you feel down, discouraged, beat up, you know, don't feel very good or very useful, worthwhile, anything. So how do they get through that? Well, often they'll import an idea from a movie or a TV show that says, but one day I'm going to be great. I'm going to rise up and I'm going to be the best doggone whatever doohickey thingy that there is. I'm going to be the best guitarist. I'm going to be the best singer. I'm going to be the best sports athlete. I'm going to be the best at whatever. Right? We see this with the disciples in the New Testament, don't we? They want to be great. That's why they're following Jesus. They don't have any great high-minded things. We want to be special. I want to be on your right hand of the throne, Lord. I want to be great. And that kind of motivation and that kind of idea can carry us through some difficult times. It's like in the David and Goliath story, we use the 5 smooth stones. You know, we have to have something to combat the tough things. And sometimes a stone, a natural truth, can be something like, oh, I want to be great. It's natural. It's truth, but it's natural. What's happened in this story is the things that we have used, maybe even this 5 smooth stone level of truth, this belief, this way we hold the world, has died. Abner is a commander. He is like a 5 smooth, one of those stones. He's a fighter. David's saying, you know what? It's okay to mourn the loss of that. It's okay. I use that. I have an affection for that. I love that teaching. The example I used, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, was, you know, I loved the teaching in my mind from the Exodus story that, the finger of God will reach down and get those Egyptians. You know, he'll smite those evildoers. And when I realized that, you know what? That's not actually how it goes. It's like, there's a part of me that kind of dies with that. It says, I kind of miss the way of seeing the world that way. And sometimes we have other things, that we have to let go of. We have to let go of our desire to control other people, right? Oh, well, we don't have to do that because the Lord's actually in control and He's taking care of all these things. I got to see the world differently. It's not about me getting what I want. It's not about me being right about how things should be. It's about me helping others be the best that they can be. And sometimes that means even helping them down a stupid path so that they can learn their lesson, right? It takes time to get here. David was 7 years and 6 months, and he's king over Hebron before the intellectual side finally submits. It's a process, but this is what the ascendance of the spiritual looks like. Starting to step back and say, okay, instead of doing things the way I did before with Abner and Joab, or Abner in charge and Saul, we're going to do things differently. Joab's not perfect. David's in charge. He says, what are we going to do? Every time I'm going to do something, what makes David so great? He always checks with the Lord first. What do you want me to do? Or as they say, what would Jesus do? Amen.